Confucius advised us to study the past if you would define the future, and therefore my guest this week is perfectly placed to help guide us in such uncertain times. Dan Korn is Mr. History. He spent 10 years making historical documentaries before turning his talents to broadcasting them. He is now Vice President Programming at A&E Networks UK, where he leads a team responsible for sourcing and scheduling all content for A&E's UK portfolio of channels, including the newly rebranded Sky History. So if anyone can help us to use the past to define the future, Dan's the man. Hi, Dan. Welcome to the podcast. Good to have you on board.
Thanks, Danny. Good to be here.
My question to you is, if you could be any historical figure, who would that be?
Gosh, what a fascinating question. I think it is a slightly peculiar answer, I suspect. But to cut a long story short, the person that I'd be really interested to be would be Robert McNamara, who was JFK's Secretary of State for Defense. And I'm fascinated by McNamara. Errol Morris made a brilliant film called The Fog of War about him and about what he came to realize in his career. But I think he was the youngest, ever president of the Ford Motor Company, and he was plucked from the private sector by JFK, who wanted the sort of brightest and the best. He sort of tried to run Department of Defense at a critical period of the Cold War, almost like the sort of Ford Motor Company. And then, of course, he got drawn in further and further into the quagmire of Vietnam. And he then eventually, fell out with LBJ, Lyndon Johnson. And clearly later in life had this sort of source of huge regret, and hence the Fog of War. But I just found him a very sympathetic and interesting character and hugely talented. So I think that if I could be anyone, it would be Bob McNamara.
Excellent choice. I actually sold The Fog of War to the BBC. That was a Sony Pictures Classics movie.
Did you? I think it's absolutely I think it's a fabulous film. I think, Errol Morris, of course, is a brilliant filmmaker.
Well, it's another point of crossover for us, because I was looking through your background. I noticed that you started out as a producer making documentaries back in the 3BM days, and it turns out that we had a documentary in common called World War I in Colour, which was a show that I was involved in on the Sony side, and you helped to produce. And I think it'd be really interesting to just very briefly chart your path, because you were a producer of documentaries and then moved over to the broadcast side. And it's a very interesting career path.
I always knew that I wanted to be in TV. Right from an early age. And the reason that I knew that was because I grew up largely in a household which didn't have a television. My mother was an educationalist. She was a supply teacher, and she got it into her head that it in some way was detrimental to our educational development to be constantly watching TV. And she wanted us to have more lively discussions around the dinner table. So she got rid of it, and my father and I used to have to go and hire a television for sort of special occasions. So if there was an Olympics or a royal wedding, or I remember the discovery of the Titanic in 1985 by Bob Ballard, we would beat a familiar road to the television hire shop in Norwich, and we would hire a television for that sort of period of time. So I was really transfixed by it. It became a sort of a really exotic, exciting medium. And when I used to go around to friends' houses, I would plonk myself in front of it, much to their chagrin, and just watch continuously. So I always had a fascination for it. I studied first at Nottingham University, and then I did a master's in Slavonic and Soviet and Eastern European Studies at the School of Slavonic and East European Studies, London University. And I became a particular sort of devotee and fan of sort of Soviet politics and history. So that was my area, if you like, of specialism. And I was lucky enough when I came out from doing my master's to be introduced to an independent television producer, a man called Malcolm Brinkworth at Touch Productions. And he needed somebody to go over to the Soviet Union, go over to Russia, go to Moscow, and to do some research for a special that he was making, a dispatches special on Robert Maxwell. And that was my sort of entree. The magical nature of TV for me has never really died from that moment. I was completely transfixed by the process, the whole process of gathering of information, and then the way in which that information was transposed into interviews and to narrative. It was just brilliant. And then we ended up doing another sort of slightly current affairs documentary for Inside Story. Steve Hewlett was the commissioning editor, and it was on junior doctors and pressures they were under. Again, I just found it the most absorbing and fascinating process. And from there, I sort of graduated from a researcher to assistant producer to producer, director. Effectively, a new company was formed called 3BM Television, and I began working very closely with a guy called Simon Burthon, who in many ways was my mentor and is one of, I think, one of the most brilliant people working in television in terms of his ability to both write and produce and direct. And I sort of learned everything I knew really from Simon. And we made a number of secret histories for 3BM, Harold Wilson, the final years, about his 74 to 76 administration. We did a series of secret histories on the sort of criminal fraternity, which I absolutely loved, which was Lords of the Underworld, about Bob Boothby and the Krays. We did the Great Train Robbery, and we did a film called The Pawn King, the Stripper and the Bent Coppers, which was all about how the sort of corruption of Soho and the way in which the police and some of the Soho pawn barons worked hand in glove in those days. So I began directing, and I ended up the sort of one of the really formative pieces I did was a series called Age of Terror. Series producer was John Blair, who'd won an Oscar for Anne Frank Remembered, very sort of eminent person. I very much enjoyed working with him. And I directed episode 3 of that, which was called In the Name of God. And that took me to the Middle East, and it took me to Jordan and to Syria and the Lebanon, and fascinating. And it was for Discovery. And I ended up on the back of that series. Discovery invited me in to be there, if you like, sort of original content person in the UK. And that got me over onto the broadcasting side. So it was 10 years in production effectively. And then I started in 2005, I started on the broadcasting end, and I got to appreciate the industry from a very different side. And I spent 10 years at Discovery working my way up to senior vice president of programming, and ended up sort of running channels and launching channels and things. But I've never sort of forgotten what it's like to be a producer. And I think that when you're on the commissioning side, when you're on the broadcasting side, it's very important to remember the unique pressures and possibilities of production, so that you get the very best from your suppliers. And that's what I'm doing now at History, and thoroughly enjoying myself.
What were the big learnings about moving from the production side and running a business side into the broadcaster side?
One of the big things it involved is having a more strategic mindset. I mean, when you're on the other side, you're looking at a slate of content across a year. You're looking on a range of genre and a range of brands, and you're planning the year out in a rather more strategic way. The process of sort of running a production company is very much, how can you build your turnover? How can you build your specialism? How can you become known for a particular type of specialist factual output? And that was very much what we tried to do at 3BM. We were fixed on making very interesting films, but growing the company from, obviously from nothing up to a turnover of 3 million, and then trying to build strands and franchises. So we did a lot of limited series, but a big breakthrough came when we came up with a series called 0 Hour, which was based on the sort of drama 24, and it was the idea of sort of ticking down, an hour of a critical event, and that was sort of quite transformative for us as a company, because it was not only a returning format, but it was something that we owned rights in, and therefore you could actually make a bit of money out of it. When you're in a broadcaster, and particularly I think an American-owned broadcaster, you're very much more fixated on the sort of wider strategic considerations and the kind of product that will fit into the brand patina, but will also give you a sort of an edge.
So what have been the lockdown challenges for you? That probably cuts across things like transmission, what the revenue and income model looks like, securing the programming pipeline, scheduling issues. I mean, presumably all of these elements have had an enormous shock to the system.
I mean, they have. I think we're lucky as a business at A&E Networks that we have a healthy sort of subscription element to our business as well as advertising. So it means that we're not as exposed maybe as some others. I think honestly, the biggest challenge has just been the fact that the sort of the creative end of things has been much more difficult to achieve, just because there has not been, shooting and not been production in the same way. And the thing that is the most fun, whether at a producer or a broadcaster, are those creative moments, those creative coming together and catalysts, and all of a sudden getting involved in a project. So that has been, I think, it's been the hiatus in production and the creative process that's been the trickiest thing, I think, to manage. And I'm very relieved that we're sort of getting out of it. We had some interesting things going on. So we make this series called Forged with Steel, which is a companion piece to Forged in Fire, and it's with a YouTuber called Alex Steele, and he used to live in Norwich, and he's now moved to Montana. And he was busy in his forge and sending us lots of stuff, which was great. And just to see, even though there was this lockdown, there's still Alec beavering away in his forge and contributing pieces that we've made into a series, Forged with Steel Season 2, which is a great fun series. And so that was good. And then we had another team that was doing a World War II piece for us for the 75th anniversary of VE Day, called Race to Victory, which was CIC Media, and they were doing a nice job. And again, because it was largely archive based, they were able to get on with it.
And you mentioned having that dual income stream, and that's a really interesting point, and particularly relevant because earlier on in the year you rebranded one of the channels to Sky History, and so that very much puts you as very close partners, joined at the hip with your platform partners. And I would have thought, in hindsight, that turned out to be a tremendously valuable and smart thing to do, given subsequent events, and I'm sure in the long term as well. Is that something that more and more third-party channels are going to have to think about doing, do you think?
Well, I think it's been brilliant for us. I think you're right. I mean, the timing couldn't have been better. In a world of consolidation and where sort of big is beautiful, it's wonderful to have such a sort of heavyweight commercial and creative partner with us. What I can't see any change to this sort of pattern of consolidation of media, content creators and broadcasters and all the rest of it. I just think that in this particular world, that makes sense. So yes, I think that there will be. I think that other brands may well be looking at closer alliances. I'm just very relieved we got ours when we did.
It does feel like that there are these trends, and I think there are trends in the wider economy that TV is a part of. So if I think about retail, for example, manufacturers and producers sold to their customers through retailers, and the landlords that own the shops. And between them, they brought the customers in and said, we've got lots of customers, so let us be your route in, and we'll charge a retail price. And you had the rise of the shopping malls, which in a way are a little bit like pay TV platforms that aggregate lots of people and provide lots of services. And now the malls are all going bust, and people are no longer going to the high street. The high street is changing. And that's where you now start to see the growth of online shopping. And that, in a way, is a little bit like this whole direct-to-consumer approach. And so is that the kind of evolution? And I think it's interesting in the context of now being so aligned with the mall owner, if you like, or the high street retailer. Do you see that there's this inexorable move to direct-to-consumer? And how does that work for a pay TV operator like you guys, or predominantly pay TV operators?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think the analogy is interesting. I think what works so well in the retail business, and the reason that aggregators maybe haven't, obviously have not fared as well as they might, like shopping malls, although some shopping malls, Westfield, there are those who have bucked the trend. But I think you're right. It's, the idea of cutting out the middleman or middle person and going direct to consumer is a very pervasive and persuasive one, and appealing. I think that what it gives you in retail is huge convenience, and that's what it's born out of. And I think that's what Amazon have done brilliantly, is just the sort of, they take every bit of pain out of the whole shopping experience. And I think it's slightly different with media, because I think that there are two things. I think firstly that the sheer volume of choice of product that there is in media means that I think there's very much a role for a content aggregator who can be almost the sort of kite mark of quality and tell you that this is the stuff you should be watching because it's the right, this is the right stuff. So what aggregators I think can bring is in a way, in the media space, they do take the pain out of the process, and they can say, we filtered this for quality, we filtered this for brand, and you will find something here. And so they provide the convenience factor that, if you like, in the retail market, the likes of Amazon do. So I think I do think there is a natural groundswell towards direct to consumer, and I think for us and other organizations it poses some interesting questions. But at the same time, I think in media there is also a huge need for trusted content curation and aggregating brands that can also fulfill that role of bringing it all together. There is definitely a huge appetite and room for people just wanting to sit down and have choices presented to them that they can then sort of take advantage of in the simplest way possible. That's where I think that things like the EPG and platforms and all the rest of it, content aggregators, will be much longer lived than anybody has predicted.
I love the fact that we're referring to the EPG as some kind of old school technology. I remember when I was growing up, when I used to go and stay with my grandparents, my grandfather used to say, "Can you turn the television over to number 9?" And we had a dial that I was the remote control, and I would go and turn it, and you twist it round to number 9.
Yeah.
Right. If all young people ask your parents what this is, or grandparents maybe, what this involves. So now to think back to or talk about the EPG as this sort of ancient technology. I mean,
that's right. It is amazing.
We're getting on, man.
Yeah. Yes.
But you're really interesting to get your thoughts on trends in documentary programming. When I think about how documentaries are evolving, I think about the popularity of sports documentaries, for example. That's something that's really come to the fore. The move from traditional linear storytelling to contextual narratives that flip between the past and the present. Factual entertainment now becoming a big part of documentaries. Shows that brings the past to life. So in terms of the entertainment side, Why Does Everyone Hate the English, which is one of your shows? Abandoned Engineering, that brings the past to life, not one of your shows.
Wish it was.
Those are some of them. There may be many more, but I'd be really interested in your thoughts on what you're seeing and if you think that there are more evolutions to come.
I think what's interesting is the enduring qualities of certain things within documentary making that kind of remain as true now as they did yesterday, in terms of the power of stories, the power of and the emotion that is conveyed through some of the best documentary making. I think what's interesting is the layer of additional styling and sophistication that probably has come in, which I find very interesting and engaging. So, when a series on Netflix, and excuse for anybody who's easily offended, excuse my language, but the series Don't Fuck With Cats came along.
Love that show.
For Raw TV. I mean, you just sort of thought, well, this of course has all the ingredients we know about, has brilliant characters, has a really sort of something fascinating and rather deeply peculiar in its midst, but the way in which this sort of network of kind of armchair social media detectives, online detectives, have got together and sort of made it their mission to solve this case, it becomes really something new and different, and that I suppose is not a trend, but just something that I think is to be admired and to be applauded. And it's quite interesting on the other, another series that's out recently is on the Murdochs. And of course, there's this massive interest. There's always been a massive interest in the Murdochs, but all the more so because of Succession, I think. But just to see how they brought to life the story of that dynasty, and the way in which the Murdoch news gathering and news dissemination has become such an important part of our lives and affected our lives, I thought was brilliantly done. So just in the world of sport, because everybody was talking about it through lockdown, is The Last Dance. I thought it was brilliant. I think any sports fan, any basketball fan, but any general sports fan would love it. But of course, that series doesn't happen unless in that critical season, somebody isn't filming everything that moves and somehow getting this incredible access. And that's always been true. If you've got that piece of footage, if you've got, if you happen to have got that piece of access, you can do something really powerful. So I suppose that sort of reinforces itself. I think there is amazing ingenuity and sophistication in the way stories are told, but ultimately the fundamental building blocks remain the same.
We love Don't Fight with Cats. My son recently dyed his hair blonde, and
Really?
we did spend a week or so referring to him as Luca Magnotta, which
I thought I was in awe of it.
So if there was a documentary of the last X number of years that you didn't commission but would have liked to have commissioned, whether it's a one-off or a series, which would be the one that you would point to and say, yeah, I wish that was mine?
Well, I think in the world of sort of pure sort of documentary, I think for me anyway, Adam Curtis's The Mayfair Set, I sort of thought that was truly amazing piece of work. The other one is probably Kevin MacDonald's One Day in September about the 1972. I mean, again, a lot of people would probably have that in their list. And I thought the way in which Kevin told that story, which was so shattering and so inexplicable, was brilliantly done. But then in the factual entertainment world, I always remember James May's Toy Stories, which I thought was just brilliant. When he was building scale models, building a Meccano bridge in Liverpool, or a scale model of a Spitfire, a massive scale. I thought that was brilliant, really cleverly done. I think one of those probably, but I wouldn't have minded, frankly, commissioning Taskmaster. I think that's great as well. So it's sort of, I've got quite eclectic taste, but yeah, one of those.
Very good. Well, just to finish off, I always ask my guests if they would share their thoughts on a lockdown book, album, film, and box set that would sustain them through a lockdown should they find themselves within such a thing. So if you could share your thoughts on that, I'm sure we would love to hear them.
At the start of lockdown, like many other households, I'm sure, I started the third book in Hilary Mantel's trilogy, The Mirror and the Light, about the life and career of Thomas Cromwell. And I just think the achievement in producing, Wolf Hall, Bring Up the Bodies, Mirror and the Light, I think are just fantastic. And those definitely, that trilogy of books would definitely sustain me through lockdown. Music, again, I got a very sort of slightly bizarre and weird eclectic music taste, but they did on Sky Arts, they reunited the actors and actresses from the film Quadrophenia, which was a film I loved, and I definitely think The Who would loom large, I think, bizarrely in my playlist.
Film?
I think the one film that I absolutely love is a film called Get Carter, starring Michael Caine, directed by Mike Hodges. It's set in the Northeast, and it's about a guy going back to try and find out how and why his brother was killed. And it's just, I think, Michael Caine's finest hour, and just a brilliant film. So yeah, I think Get Carter.
Very reminiscent and famous for the scene of Reg Roberts off Coronation Street being told by Michael Caine, "You're a big man, but you're out of shape. Me, the living."
Exactly right.
And finally, a box set.
This is slightly dull and predictable, but I think The Sopranos.
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing. Well, Dan Korn, thank you so much for being a guest on the show this week. And
thank you for having me.
I expect that you'll be off to Brighton on your moped at some point over the first weekend to relive those mod era.
Thank you. I hope so.
Cheers. Take care.
Thanks, Danny.